Call this meeting to order. Chair sees the quorum, and I will start with Madam Chair. Do you have any comments?
Good morning.
All right. So I think we're going to continue with some discussion. There was, I know, one member that was not here yesterday that had sent in some recommendations. Lee Johnson, Representative Johnson. If you'll punch your button, we will start with you and let you give your ideas of what you had.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and apologies to everyone here for not being able to make the meeting yesterday. I was able to listen to it live, and I want to say I appreciate everybody's thoughts and comments, especially appreciative to the chairs for giving us the opportunity to provide some input on this process and giving us the forum here in this meeting to speak to our thoughts and ideas on the process. I want to thank BLR and everyone who went into the effort of preparing this adequacy report. This is a very good document, in my opinion, that's well written with lots of good thoughts and ideas in it as well. So before I start, let me preface by saying I recognize that I am no subject matter expert when it comes to educational funding. All I've done essentially is spend some time reading the adequacy report and trying to listen to the recommendations that are in there provided by the experts we've brought in to try to assess adequacy in the state of Arkansas and how we fund education. So I think we need some fundamental changes to the matrix. You know, the matrix to me, when I started here, was this mysterious entity where dollars went in and dollars came out, and it was something that I felt like was very complicated. Now that I've spent a little time with it, I understand it better. It's my understanding of the matrix is that it's a funding formula that was presented almost 20 years ago based on the opinions of some experts that we had then. And since we've started this process of adequacy, there's not been any fundamental changes to the matrix other than the salary levels that we've changed over time. That's my understanding. And I think we need to look at, in a very serious and concerted way, how the matrix is structured. We need to make strong consideration to changing some of the FTEs that are in the matrix. We need to make strong consideration to pulling out some items in the matrix and putting them other places, specifically special education. I was able to listen to the meeting yesterday. I agree with Representative Godfrey. I think we need to take special education out of the matrix and create a categorical fund for that based on a weighted system modeled after what other states have done so that we're funding special education in a full and fair way. I think we need to take instructional facilitators, and we need to create a new line that pulls out the assistant principal. The 0.5 assistant principal that's in instructional facilitators, it's a statutory requirement, as I understand it, for every school with 500 students to hire an assistant principal. We spend about 66% of our dollars for instructional facilitators on assistant principals. Yet we know from evidence-based research that instructional facilitators are critical to moving the needle forward with education. And so what we're in effect doing is we're underfunding instructional facilitators by not creating a special line within the matrix for assistant principals. I think there also needs to be 0.5 pulled out for technology instructors and that out of that instructional facilitators as well. I think we need to fully fund librarian from 0.5 to 1. I think we need to look at staffing ratios for teachers and bring them up approximately 33% over the next 3 years based on recommendations from the associates we brought in. I hate acronyms. I'm going to say APA because I don't know how to pronounce the name of Adenblick and Palick. But APA was the people we hired to make recommendations, and this report is fraught with recommendations from those experts, and I think we need to give strong consideration to those. I would fully fund technology to 400 because I think that creates a one-to-one ratio for technology equipment to students, which I think is important in the current technological age. I think we need to take transportation out of the matrix and rethink how we fund transportation, combining it with the Enhanced Transportation Fund. And I know that's a lot. I think we need to look at operations and maintenance. That's something that is, we're having to move a lot of pieces around, it looks like, for our administrators to fully fund that. There are some formulas we could look at. that would help us understand better how we need to fully fund operations and maintenance. And I don't think we need to do that in the next 3 days. I don't think we need to do that between now and the 15th. I want to be clear. I think this is something that I want to consider as we move into the next legislative session. As I prefaced, I'm no expert. I have ideas because I've read this adequacy report. I feel like some of these ideas are good ideas. Some of them may not. But I am committed to the process of trying to look at how we are fundamentally funding education through the matrix and try to think outside the box and try to make some changes as we get feedback from all the stakeholders. And so I appreciate the time I've been given to make those comments, and I will try to wrap it up, and happy to take any questions and leave it at that.
Anyone have questions? Representative Godfrey, you have a question on that?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much, Representative Johnson. I'm glad that we're on the same page about the categorical option for special education funding. Have you dug in any further than I have about what that weighted system looks like? How, what is the per pupil for, certain types of disabilities and what that might look like and what we can anticipate as a kind of a bottom line and top line per pupil amount?
Sure.
I saw our report said the average or total expenditures per pupil were at 1082 per pupil. So does that track with your numbers that you've seen, or have you gotten that far?
I think the number that I've seen is actually around 7,700 for 2021 as a per pupil expenditure, which is, there's a delta there between the per pupil expenditure for special ed and the recommended ADM per pupil expenditure. As far as other ways, there's two different general ways. One is a fixed model where there's a fixed approach. The other is a weighted approach. I think the weighted approach is better. There's 8 states that do a weighted approach. There's 8 different ways that states do weighted approaches. The most common way is based on disability type. So they just look at a school and say, how many of this type of disability do you have? And the more severe disability types, the higher population of these students you have, the more money you would receive based on a weighted scale. I think it's better to try to look at disability severity as opposed to type. But I'm just, to your point, I'm just starting to explore that some, and those are just 2 ways in which it's done. Some people weight it based on expenditures. So how much is each school spending, and they break that into categories. So there are about 8 different ways that other states do this, and I think it's important that we, consider all of them in a real meaningful way.
I agree. Thank you. Thanks for your work.
Are there any other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Representative Johnson, for your suggestions, and I will sound off on that too. This is something that we've looked at numerous times, and you brought up transportation. Transportation is something we've talked about in many different times, and that's when we come up with supplemental transportation funding, because the only other way to fund transportation is either route miles or students in the seat. Those are 2 things. It's really hard to get the students in the seat correctly all the time, but it gets pretty close. But that's some of the things we've looked at in the past. It's very difficult, but we can do it. And I think it takes somebody that really wants to challenge that and work on that legislation during the year. And we talk about it a lot, and nobody ever does it. And Representative Lowry is not here today. I will bring his name up, and that's one of the things that he's been bringing up for years. And I've told him, I said, Representative Lowry, you need to take that on and do it and come up with a solution. And he's never found a better solution than what we're actually trying to do by pulling it out, putting it supplemental to actually hit those rural schools. So, Madam Chair.
Just a follow-up on that, I think Representative Rick Beck also had presented some great suggestions a couple of years ago to the Education Committee meeting about the funding in the matrix and how it's disproportionate to your smaller schools. And again, I'm not sure how those good ideas get worked into this process, because I agree with Representative Johnson and with Representative Godfrey and I know it was a recommendation that I heard from the written testimony. And let me just say, the written testimony that was received, really appreciate the Rural Educators Association for emphasizing and stressing the need for broadband and the need for our students to be able to have that technology and availability at their homes. Couldn't agree more with what you wrote in there, which is why I also support recommending increasing the line item for technology. But I think it's important for these ideas, especially to the special ed, to create a new categorical fund, for us to have that ability to work through that with a recommendation from the committee. So, I would like for us to have that opportunity and for members to have those opportunities to make those changes through this process. And perhaps those are recommendations that are part of the report, but not worked into the worksheet, to the numbers. But yeah, I'll leave that up to the committee on how they want to deal with that, because I think there's some really good ideas that have been presented.
Those are great ideas, and that's why we're doing this report. All of these items that we are speaking about will go into the report that will be filed by the 15th of October, somewhere around that date. That will go in and go out for public comment for those days before it goes to the governor's desk on the 1st. That's true, and we have actually done that last session. We made a change to add a computer science position in our FTE, and if you look on your K-12 ratios, that went from a 13.8 to a 14.8. So we added one position to that for the computer science teacher. So that brought your ratio up from 35.69 to 36.69 for 24 and 25. So that's the process you go through. You come during a session, you run those legislation to add those FTE positions, and then we add them to the matrix during the matrix. Go ahead.
Members, I know I had some questions on what I discussed yesterday with the differentiating pay and differentiating pay processes. And that's Tennessee Code 49-3-306 for folks that want to look that up. But it's again based on high needs, subject areas, and schools. Instructional roles and/or responsibilities and performance are three of those factors in that. So that was my recommendation, would be to follow the Tennessee statute and what they have done with giving that flexibility and that ability to the school districts. So just for your reference, that is the code for that. Thank you.
Senator Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did just want to lift up that Representative Murdoch worked several years on trying to address the transportation issue and made some headway, but it's still a problem, because everything is, and I don't mean this negatively necessarily, but everything is a hostage to a matrix where we work assiduously to meet adequacy. Because when the courts ruled that we had to meet, this adequacy and equity, and we had to define what adequate is. And since that time, almost 20 years ago, we've been chasing adequacy, and that's where we set our sights. And I think the fact that we're stuck in chasing adequacy, it clouds our vision of imagining excellence or world class, because we reached that thing that we defined back in 2003 or 2005 or whenever we came to the final decision, and we are still reaching for that same goal. So I'm just suggesting that if we were to think about absolute excellence, that might give us a vision for thinking about all the rest of the things that we keep working for when we come and do these studies. And for almost 20 years, not quite, and I've lost on this, and I accept that I've lost on it, I've been trying to get us to think about defining what we want in education. What's our North Star? Surely it can't be adequacy. Surely it just can't be things to be adequate. So I think part of our problem is we haven't defined what we want to be. And that's why we do it in pieces. It is hard to do things in pieces and make it work as a whole, because we haven't defined the whole. So I hope at some point in our state, we decide what do we want to be and work for that. Because if we don't, we will keep trying to make adequate transportation, make adequate whatever you name it, by taking it out of a model that we have outgrown in the first place. And the thing that worries me the most is operating under this illusion, I think, that if we take this out and put it over here and fund it, take it out, put it over here and fund it, we're still gonna have the matrix. And then you're gonna have a matrix that's worse than what it is right now, because you're gonna have far less money to do the same things to make sure you have adequate resources in the school if you don't put more money in the matrix. And that's what I worry about, instead of our defining the whole and then fund it from that, as opposed to piece by piece. Because just like a child is a whole place, a school is a whole place. We're not going to reduce the number of rooms we have to have for the kids that are in the school just because we took money out for this and money out for that, but we're still going to need to fund it. So I just say that for sad that we haven't done it, and hope we do someday decide what the North Star is and be just as fervent about that as we are, I don't know, let's say athletics in our state. That would be really great.
Just thank you, Senator Elliott. Representative Cozart stepped away, but I think one of the written testimonies that was provided to us by, I think it was the Winthrop Rockefeller Foundation, basically said to tear up the matrix and start over. And the way forward is to I'm reading from their recommendation, the way forward is to dismantle the current education system and replace it with a system that effectively ensures all students receive a high-quality education. And I'm reading from their written testimony that we've built a system that creates inequitable outcomes. And I couldn't agree more.
All right. Is there anyone else that has any discussion on adequacy issues or potential recommendations to the 2022 adequacy report? Anyone else have a recommendation or a potential issue? Okay.
Thank you, Mr.
Yes,
Chair.
ma'am.
Are all of the comments that have been written to the committee going to be included in the report? Or is the final report going to exclude those? Will all of those things be like ancillary to the report?
That's your choice. Is that your question? I have to ask Taylor that. I think everything that's discussed, it goes into the report.
Goes into the report?
Yes, pretty sure.
That would be nice. And while we're at it, Mr. Chair, I need a quick question from the Department of Ed, if I may.
If you, okay, I will go ahead and
It's
do
dealing
that.
with school safety. It's one
What
of those
kind
things.
Who do we have here from the Department of Ed that wants to answer a question?
Yeah, Greg's there. I see Greg.
I can't see behind the column. I think they hide on purpose back there.
Or John's back there, okay.
Secretary Key, would you
Okay, Secretary Key's
please
here.
come forward, please?
Probably depends on the question, but Johnny Key, Department of Education.
It's not a loaded question. It's one of safety as we're dealing with adequacy. Several incidents have come to my attention where people have been attacked in the public schools at the beginning of this year. And some of them suffer from the woe-begotten impression that they cannot defend themselves or they will lose their jobs. What are we doing to make sure that employees know they have the right to self-defense?
Senator, I don't know that those situations have been brought to my attention, so I don't know that I can give you an answer. I would definitely want to get some more context before I could respond to that.
Oh, I have had 2 individuals in the public schools who have been attacked by students this school year. One of them said, "I'll lose my job if I defend myself." Now, surely there's somewhere in state law, or we need to put it there, where people, as we're dealing with school safety, have the right to self-defense. Is that already in the law, or do we need to put it in the law as we deal with adequacy?
We're happy to look into that and get your response back,
All
Senator.
right, thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
All right. I don't know if anybody else has any questions. We'll pull you back up if we do. Representative Beck, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I really don't have a question, but it's more of a statement. I may be the lone person on the committee with this, but I want to bring up the point that the matrix, I mean, it's very popular to say, let's get rid of the matrix and make everything nice and great again. But I will say that the matrix does provide, I believe, stability to our schools systems year in, year out. I do recognize that there needs to be some adjustments made to the matrix as to how some of the categories within it, maybe some adjustment factors based upon school sizes and things like that, that would make it more equitable funding for smaller school districts versus some of our larger school districts. The transportation is another thing that was mentioned. I think that's another area where we could certainly use the matrix to actually give the school districts stability as far as their funding year in and year out. So I'll get off my soapbox now, but I do believe that the matrix, I personally believe that the matrix could be adjusted to do exactly what we want it to do. And I would caution my colleagues, if you get rid of the matrix, it is sort of an anchor which we work around right now. And that does add some stability to the funding for the different school districts and so on and so forth. So just keep that in mind when you're considering things. Thank you.
Can I respond to
Your response.
that? I just like to make a comment to respond to that. I think that's true. I guess the problem is I'm not really sure I can point to some reforms through it. I mean, it serves as an anchor. However, it also bogs us down to where I don't see a lot of reforms that have been discussed through the different recommendations and the different proposals actually making it their way through the matrix to fruition. That to me becomes a problem. We've dealt with it different ways by creating different categorical funds. I would agree 100% with Representative Cozart about transportation, Representative Murdoch, I know, and others. That's a big, big deal. And for your small schools, I'm not sure how they're going to be able to handle something as it flows all the way through and they're still kind of on the short end of the stick because we're not really adequately looking at the needs for those smaller rural schools. And to me, that's a problem and it's an issue that has to be fixed and addressed. So I think there are real fruitful things that we have to look at and dig in and do. And I wanted to respond to that because I think there's a lot of issues there that need to be addressed moving forward, however we do it.
All right, Representative Godfrey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is just, are we going to be talking about this proposed matrix that Representative Evans talked about yesterday? Like you said, does anybody else have any questions or recommendations? I mean, are we taking some time to dig into this? Is that what we're doing next? Or are we just going through individual recommendations? I'm just trying to see where we are in the agenda, basically.
You're talking about the recommendation that you had for special ed teachers?
No, I mean, I feel good about having presented mine. I'm just wondering on this like proposed matrix that Representative Evans kind of introduced yesterday, are we there? Are we talking about that yet? Or
Not yet.
Okay. I just
We're
needed
just
to.
talking about if there's any additional recommendations or discussions, we'll get to that in a minute.
Okay.
So,
I don't have any. Thank you.
Representative Sturts, are you still on? Hit it again. I think I shut you off a while ago. There you go. You're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And my question kind of goes along with Representative Godfrey's. I had just one quick question about something I didn't see in Representative Evans' proposal, but while everybody's kind of getting on their soapbox, I'll get on mine too. You know that I'm still teaching. I'm one of the few who are still active. And every day that I miss work it's um, it's a lot for me to be here. And so I try to come when I know that, my presence is needed and, that we have something to discuss and to vote on and make a decision. One thing, though, that I keep hearing over and over that even I myself have personally experienced is anytime that a recommendation is made or an idea is brought forward, it's usually kind of put into two boxes. Well, that's not adequacy, or, you can't do that in here, that would be legislation, or that's not really us, that's something as far as a rule change goes, or whatever. I see that over and over and over. For example, we've been talking about, we spent thousands of dollars on a consultant to come and do a, pretty long study with us back in December of 2020. The enhanced student funding, for example, they told us to get away from these cliffs that we have where 70% you get so much, 90% you get so much, and so forth. And that's still in our adequacy worksheets. That was never changed as far as to a multiplier is what they recommended. And I went back and looked, and sure enough, it's here in our books as far as, what they recommended, what the multipliers would be. But we increase the funding for it, but we don't increase the calculation. We don't change the calculation or the equation. One thing then that I wondered where was in the House's recommendations was, more funding for partnership programs. We had it, I think Senator English had it in hers, but we've been talking about that as well with inflation costs going up. In case you don't know, we fund a partnership program at $168 a square foot. And there's houses being built all over your districts for a whole lot more than $168 a square foot. Can you imagine trying to build a school building? At costs now that may be $300 a square foot. Even if we increased just the total, that doesn't change the way that we're actually doing the work. And so at some point, we've got to get away from this idea that, that's a rule change or that's legislation change, and make sure that what we're going to do in adequacy is, like you said, or like has been said, it's thorough, it's well thought out. It brings something to the table then that we can take and either run legislation or provide, some rules, recommendations. But, that was my problem always with, trying to provide recommendations was it was always seen to be, well, it's going to take a lot more than that. It's going to take a lot more than that. And so as we kind of make these decisions or we talk about it, some of these things we can put in our report. We can say, we'd like to see this change. We'd like to see the way this equation is changed, or we'd like to see that, increased or whatever. Like I said, I hope that we don't lose sight of, we have some things that we can change. Transportation, like you said, is one of them that we have done and we still continue to do. But facilities is just as important. This enhanced student for funding for poverty is just as important. And so, like I said, when we get to the proper time, I'd like to ask about the House's proposal as far as facilities go as well. But I appreciate your time.
Thank you, and I believe that's what this is about. It's all about the recommendations that we come up with that will go into the report so that we can come back in the next session and bring those legislations forth that we need to change with, and such as what Representative Johnson brought out and Representative Beck and you're bringing out, and also facilities. That's something we haven't gotten to because it doesn't fit into this first sheet of matrix, but we do have to make a recommendation for our facility funding. Does it always fit the need? I think we've got a lot of work to do on facilities in the next session. We know we're short funded right now. Hopefully costs are coming back down where some of the buildings can be built at a reasonable cost instead of such an inflationary area that they've been in now. And being a builder, I've seen that so much in the last 2 years and how much the cost of buildings have inflated. But now that is starting to relax down a little bit. Will it ever be back where it was? No, it won't. So we've got to address a number to put into the increase in facility funding for either for more funding for a school or for more schools. So that will come up in a little later after the categorical stuff. I'm not the categorical, after the foundation matrix, because it doesn't go in that matrix. It's just a separate recommendation. All right. Go ahead.
Just to Senator Sturch's point, though, I agree. I really liked the recommendation on the cliffs that was made. and smoothing out those cliffs to make sure that that money really gets to the student that really is in need for those funds. I mean, why couldn't that be part of the adequacy change or worksheet? I mean, or the special ed categorical fund that seems to be full agreement. I agree with that. I think it was a great idea, and seeing that Representative Godfrey had submitted it, so I did not submit it, but
I really can't tell you. That's a pretty big undertaking to do in the final hours, is to change that. I still think we can do that in legislation and change it immediately when we run the legislation. It's just, that's going to take legislation to change all of that. If you're talking about the cliffs and the categorical for ESA and stuff like that, that was one of your,
yeah.
That's one of the recommendations. That's something that got overlooked during the recommendations. Like I said, the chairs can't take everything. That's some of the things that some of the committee members needs to kind of look over and bring up. But I mean, that's something we can do in the first part of the next session for you that will be here, is to make those changes, and it would we could run that back, and it would right back into the categorical, change that categorical up to make it work with what we have. Whether we have to change the funding for that or not, I don't know, but that's all would be in legislation that you would have to do, just as we did on the FTE for the classroom teachers of 4 through 12. We added a position for computer science last year that moved that up from 13.8 to 14.8. So that change was made during the last session, and that's kind of the way I'm saying those are the way that those need to be done. All right, Representative Beck, you're up again.
I accidentally double hit my button when I shut off a while ago.
You good?
Good.
Representative Johnson.
Yeah, just wanted to make a comment and make sure I understand the process. You know, for me, this is about getting my ideas out there based on the things that you brought to us and asked us to do. I want to be clear, this is not about me advocating for making changes abruptly in a way that is cavalier and hasn't given it its due diligence. Again, I'm no expert. I know people have ran at this a number of times in different directions. I want to give full respect to the work that's been put into this committee over the years with regard to transportation and the matrix and other things. There were a couple of other ideas, believe it or not, that I didn't get to, that I wanted to put out there as long as we're talking about ideas, things to think about as we come into the legislative session. I think we ought to consider adding career technical education into the matrix. Right now we're spending $100 million, something ballpark like that, on career technical education. Along with that, I think it's important that we look at the definition of adequacy. You know, one of the recommendations of APA was that we change the definition of adequacy to include more of a career technical education perspective. I also think we ought to add a dyslexia instructor, interventionist. That's something that's mandated that schools have, but we don't have that in the matrix. So again, as long as we're getting ideas out there, that's an idea that I think we ought to look at as well as we move into the session. And I think we should consider creating a categorical fund for mental health providers. We're currently funding that through other support staff right now in the matrix. We're looking at doing some school safety things underneath the matrix in the categorical, and I think it's an important opportunity to fund mental health provisions under the categorical as well, which is an important part of school safety. So I just wanted to get those other ideas out there, and now I'll be quiet, and appreciate the latitude to get those ideas on the record.
Thank you, Representative Johnson. You mentioned career ed, and I've heard that from a few. You know, career ed we really do have career ed in some of our schools through our vocational committee, departments such as FFA and SHOP and things like that. That is kind of a career ed issue. Now, career ed is funded through higher ed, so we'd have to make some changes on that to be able to move those around to do it a little different. But we're open. You know, we're always open for legislation to do those things. So we can look at that for the next following year to do that and bring back. And if we have to come back and revisit the matrix and change up some things, we can always pull it up in the next session and make those additions or deletes and do what we need to do. Representative Godfrey, you're back up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just kind of listening to this conversation and reflecting on my experience of being a committee member throughout this process, I think it could be helpful in the next biennium, and I know that I won't be here, but just thinking about the work of this committee for the adequacy study, it may be helpful to kind of restructure the way we do these monthly meetings and to add kind of a work session to create recommendations after each monthly meeting. BLR does an incredible job in presenting their portion of the report based on certain themes. They presented on funding, they presented on spending, they presented on categoricals, they presented on teacher retention and recruitment, they presented on all of these different components of our education system. And then now that we're in October, it's like, okay, let's go back and remember everything they taught us for the whole year and compile recommendations based on that year-long study. I wonder if it may be helpful moving forward if every month we had, as part of the meeting, a time to kind of brainstorm and workshop recommendations for that particular topic or that particular area. So for example, we heard back in April, we heard the report from BLR on teacher salary, teacher recruitment and retention strategies and struggles. And so if after those 2 days, we would, bookmark an hour to do the work of brainstorming recommendations then, and do that subsequently every month for every topic, so that it's not just one big kind of like, oh, yikes, it's October, we've done the study, but what was it that we learned back in, October or September or whatever? We've kind of intermittently and consistently done work to kind of brainstorm and come up with recommendations so that we're pulling from a year's worth of good ideas that we've had all together and are not having to do this huge, kind of recap of the report. It's just a recommendation. Like I said, I won't be here, but I think that could be helpful and could maybe keep us from missing some things that, if the recommendation is only toward the end of the study or to the year, that maybe we forgot we heard back in the beginning. So just a thought.
Thank you. I will chime in on that. That's some of the things we have tried to do in the past. As you notice, our committees, when we get down to the very last thing of the committee, people are gone. They won't stay. And I'm not saying everybody, but some do not stay. So it's hard to get them to hang around and do a workshop. We've tried that. Actually, probably my first or second time as chair, I set up committees to work on certain things. And when we were getting down to the adequacy, that turned into a football, basketball, whatever they wanted to talk about, and never really worked on the items that we had. So here's the deal. It takes commitment from these members to be here and do this. And when you sign up for education committee, you need to be committed to education. So if you sign up for public health, you need to be committed to public health. It's not just a committee you come into and you get per diem and sit there and then walk out. It's something that is interactive. You have to be a part of it. As far as voting on the things that we hear at that time, we tried that once too. That didn't work. We had to go back and revisit everything and redo it. So, I mean, I would say that we could do something like that. We could talk about those things, make a recommendation, not put it in stone, and then come back and revisit all of that at the end. So that is something that we ended up kind of pushing off and doing that away. You in? Go ahead.
I was just going to point to what Representative Meeks said yesterday. Basically, I mean, this is just a recommendation. It could all change completely in January. That's what he said. So, I mean, I appreciate Representative Godfrey. I think that could have been fruitful. I was hoping that we could hear recommendations and incorporate those into a final draft. That was my goal and my aim.
Well, those recommendations that everybody has talked about today and in the past will go into the final report for recommendations for the Department of Ed to look at, for new legislation to come up with. And if you have made recommendations and it's something that the Department of Ed will have to do next session, I would challenge you to get with them and work on those recommendations.
Can I ask a quick question? Some members submitted drafts, but may want to change them. should we give them the ability to make some of their changes
What are you
to
talking
their,
about?
to their recommendations that they've put in? Like to fill them out more, to give them more time to get those kind of buttoned up and solidified, if they're going to be
Are you
included
talking
in the
about,
final
are you
report.
talking about his suggestion on our draft?
No, I'm talking about like Representative Godfrey, Representative Johnson,
Well, those are,
myself, Senator Elliott, Senator Chesterfield, Senator English.
so I guess my question to you is, does the Senate have a draft that they want it ready to present to vote on?
What I'm asking for is what we were just discussing. that you
Those
said
items,
would
that's what
be-
they said, this all goes into the report. All the things we're discussing goes into the report. And those are items that would be changed through legislation in the next session. All the things she's asking for FTE changes and things like that, that's not things we would change on the matrix.
Right, but I'm saying that they would be, I thought I understood you saying that they would be included in the final report. Isn't that what you
Final
asked?
report, not the final funding matrix.
Okay, I was under
Final-
the understanding
well,
that they'd
report,
be in
we'll
the
make the
report.
report, it'll go out on the 14th that's the report of everything we've talked about. A lot of that is in the future. Yeah.
Senator Chesterfield asked a question about the written testimonies that were given,
Yes.
that if they would be in the final report or not.
They'll go in the report, yes. But that doesn't mean it would be on the foundation matrix that we're doing.
Right,
Yeah.
I understand
Yes,
that.
okay.
I'm asking
Yes,
about.
all of that, everything we've talked about will go into the report, which will be filed and be sent out to the public for public comment and then given to the speaker and the pro tem.
Right, so if there's anything that needs to be changed, that needs to be finalized.
If you have a change, yeah, that's what we're asking for this morning, is for any discussion for potential recommendations or changes for what they talked about
Okay,
before. Yeah.
okay.
And that's what I'm still open for, if there's any changes in your recommendations that you have. I'm not seeing any pop up. And I'm going to ask that question, does the Senate have a recommendation on the foundation matrix?
I mean, at this time, no, that the Senate does not. We had heard from the House. My intention was to gather the information from these two meetings to create that. But no, at this time,
Okay.
I don't have one unless somebody else from the Senate has one. But we have some recommendations. My intention was to incorporate what these senators had discussed in their recommendations into the matrix. And then have that ability to present that at a later meeting.
Well, as I've mentioned yesterday, I'm not really wanting to push this on because we need to make a report. It needs to be out by the 15th with everybody starting elections, starting budget. We have a lot of things going on. I believe the House is prepared to make a motion for a matrix, but let me, Senator Fuller, I will pull you in. I didn't see you up there. Go ahead.
No, this
Oh,
Senator
I'm
Disney,
sorry.
I'm not a member of the committee, but I hope I've given a little bit of latitude.
I will give you a little bit of latitude, but not much, because there is nobody else that's not on this committee that gets a chance to talk. But I will give you that latitude right now.
Okay, no, that's fine. Didn't cut me
Okay.
off.
All right. I'm sorry. That's just the way it is. All right. Representative Vaught, you recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think we've had a great discussion here today. I think that we can all agree that there's some tweaks and some changes that could be made to Matrix. I've been saying that for several years. I look forward to working with y'all to make those fixes and changes. It's going to take us all. It's not just a couple of people who can fix and tweak this, because remember, we got to the matrix due to a lawsuit. So we also don't want to be sued again for not doing things correctly. There's been a lot of things said about things that are wrong with the matrix, but one thing I would like to bring out, we are trying to fix some teacher disparity pay in this matrix. And that's one thing that I do appreciate the committee working hard on, is to try to fix that. So in front of us today, we have a proposal. This is how this committee has worked since I've been on this committee, and this is my third term to be on the committee. Today is the day that we have proposals that are proposed, and we take a vote on those proposals. So, Mr. Chair, I would like to make a motion that we accept the adequacy proposal that the House has presented at the end of the meeting yesterday. And with that, I would also like to divide the chambers with our vote.
All right, I have a motion to, I need a second. I have a second.
Discussion?
You can speak.
I understood it was going to be presented today. It really wasn't presented that much yesterday, and the members really just got a handout of it. Are you you don't want to take any questions about what's in it? Because I'd like to
I'll
have
answer
questions about
questions.
what's in it.
You have a question on that, on the proposal? All right.
Well, I mean, you've already moved to the motions and to the, this is
We're
discussion on the motion.
Is this discussion on the motion?
So I'm understanding, so we're not able to ask any questions
You've
about.
okay, I'm just gonna say, y'all have had this all night. We gave you a proposal yesterday.
No.
You did not have that yesterday?
It was passed out at the end of the committee meeting yesterday. There has been no committee time for any members to ask questions about the handout that was given yesterday during the committee meeting. And so, are you going to allow for questions from members about your worksheet that was handed out at the end of the committee meeting yesterday? Or are you just going straight to a vote?
Representative Vaught, can I hold your vote and let us do discussion?
Hold my motion?
Don't pull it, hold it.
Yes, sir.
Okay, we're gonna hold that motion. We will discuss what was handed out yesterday.
Do we
That
have
is-
another copy for the members that weren't here yesterday?
Do we have any copies? Julie, do we have copies of that?
I don't know,
Julie,
that's
do
why
you
I'm
have any more
asking.
copies of that
I mean,
yesterday?
Senator Search, do you have a copy?
Sure we
I
do.
don't have that copy. I don't have that copy.
I think that's all they have is a small one, I'm sorry. If you were here yesterday, you should have been handed one of those. I hope you have one. When you're ready to ask a question, chime in, and we'll go over those. Representative Godfrey, I'll start with you while we're waiting on everybody else.
Thank you. I certainly anticipated being able to ask questions and discuss, even though there's a lot about this proposal that I like. I also hope, a reason I was worried about going straight to the vote is that I also think there may be situations that we want to hear from the department about. So I think it's important that we have this robust discussion now. Am I asking questions of Representative Evans or of you? Who's going to be talking about this? Of Representative Vaught?
No, the motion, she only made a motion to approve it. I'll let you refer to Representative Evans on all questions
Okay.
Because he presented that part of the matrix. It is the House version. All of us should know it. I mean, I know it, he knows it, so it's just, but I'll let Representative Evans make those comments
Okay.
back for what you asked.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I have 3 questions. If I need to get back in the queue, I can, or if I can just rapid fire those.
Ask your questions.
Okay, my first one is about the teacher salary increase, and I just want to make sure I understand the math and the mechanics of it, Representative. So it looks like under fiscal year 23 for salary enhancement, we've got that $450 per pupil that's happening for 23, and you had mentioned that would be kind of, taking care of this school year, could happen in January as soon as, March or something to start getting to districts. And then it looks like, I want to make sure that that's not a one-time bonus, because it's just one time in that salary enhancement. My understanding then is that for the subsequent years, it goes into foundation per student, just kind of that general increase, that it's folded in to that new amount in fiscal year 24 of 8129 and then sustained with 8296. Am I understanding the math correctly in that it's not just a one-time 450 for fiscal 23, but it is instead, or in addition, it is sustained through that increase from fiscal year 23 of 7413 up to 8129 per pupil. Is that right?
That is correct. It is not a bonus. It is a salary increase that we would need to pass through legislation in January, if approved by these committees as this recommendation.
And do you anticipate that legislation being one bill or two?
I personally believe it would be all one package
Okay.
as a blanket recommendation. It could certainly be, depending upon how much emphasis wanted to be put on it, it could be broken out into a separate bill.
Okay.
But yes, it is sustained because the reason for putting into the 2022-23 is to address the salary disparity now. As most everyone knows, when we're working on adequacy, we're working into the next biennium, into the 24-25 fiscal years, and so this addresses that issue now. It will go on the salary schedule. It's not a one-time such as a bonus.
Great. Thank you for the clarification. I thought that's how I understood it, but I appreciate hearing it from you. The next question is just a little bit more technical, and maybe it doesn't even matter, but I'm seeing security, this $25 million in security funding as a categorical. But my understanding of categorical funding is that it's per pupil based on like the type of student who might access that funding, and so, or who might require that funding or that programming. Is there a reason it's a categorical and not a supplemental funding? Again, maybe it doesn't matter. I'm just trying to track my understanding with like it being a pot of money versus it being a restricted fund based on student need.
I believe the reason to put it in categorical came under the advisement of the department because, as we know, Senator Irvin and her team have been working on school safety, developing a plan and working with the commission on how that would be funded per school.
Okay.
And so by putting it in categorical, that still allows that leniency to address it on a per school need,
Okay.
not necessarily just a per pupil need.
Okay, that's helpful.
Because if you do it on a per pupil need, you're creating a disparity between a smaller district and a larger district.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And then finally, kind of more broadly, looking at the foundation matrix for special ed teachers, I noticed that is flat. We're continuing to fund 2.9 special education teachers over the next biennium. And that really is probably the biggest concern to me of this proposal, is that we're seeing that stay flat. And I think that kind of speaks to the conversation we've had about categorical funding versus funding special education teachers through the matrix. Our adequacy report said, our special ed funding through this mechanism has remained flat while the number of students with disabilities has increased. It's risen by 11%, but our funding has stayed flat. And so, first of all, where did that flat recommendation come from? Like, why did we not, especially based on some of the recommendations we saw, the need to increase from 2.9 to 3.3 or to 4.05, or could there even be kind of a over time an incremental increase to that funding? Or, to my point, to Representative Johnson's point, is it worth putting a pin in that since the funding is flat anyway? And in addition to this funding matrix proposal, that this committee also makes a recommendation, and I can make this motion actually, to commit to looking at, I don't know exactly how we'd word it, but to do the work of pulling together more in-depth recommendations of how to fund special education through a weighted categorical, either in addition to or instead of this flat 2.9 FTE special education teachers. Just wondering if you can talk me through that, and then kind of in addition to that, the SPED catastrophic funding. And I'll get into that later, but that's really kind of my next line of questioning is about special ed funding.
Okay, so I think the thinking on that is, as there have been multiple comments through multiple meetings, is the concern that just because you put an increase into the foundation side, specifically into that total classroom teacher column, that if that seat is not filled, then that money is just there for the discretion of the district to use however they want to use it. And so we know from many of the reports that came through through the adequacy meetings over the last 9 months that we continue to hear that one of the greatest disparities in finding classroom teachers is the decline in special education teachers. And so I completely support the recommendation that Representative Johnson had made. He and I had a great conversation about that, and he and I share a commonality in our personal passion for taking care of special education students. We've got to do that. I think it needs to come through legislation, but the concern was just putting it into the big pot over here is not going to necessarily address the issue just because of the current disparity of finding special education teachers to fill the seat. I think that us working towards revamping how we're funding special education and doing it through some type of weighted categorical could be the answer, and we could address that with legislation in January.
Thank you. And so I would like to consider that as part of the committee's recommendation that we commit to doing a more in-depth analysis of how to better, more adequately and equitably fund special education through a different mechanism. Thank you.
If I can just make a comment on the school security, those are some assumptions. I was never presented with that information, so I don't have any input on that, but I have been working with the department on the school safety grants, and we have created a system there. I met with Representative Cozart and the speaker last week before trying to work through details. So on that, but I'm not sure how. I'm just kind of agnostic about putting the $25 million in those two areas there and creating a new categorical fund for that. I'm a little agnostic about it. I'm not sure if I like it or don't like it, but I don't think it will fit within what we're doing with the current, just as additional information. I'm not sure if it will or not, because there have been some discussions about a statewide solution that would not even be part of the matrix or a categorical spend. Those are, again, discussions that would happen, I think, in the next session. So my thought would just to leave that out, but you could put it in. To me, it doesn't matter at this point. But to your point, Representative Godfrey, I would stay here and create a new recommendation and work to get that done, because I feel like that's what we should be doing, and would be my hope. And I'd hoped to work, and I need to address this. I would hope to have worked with the House that we would have one recommendation, but we were not given. I have not been given that opportunity. So thank you.
Senator Chesterfield.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to repeat my concern about the funding for teacher salaries, because I do think that the $40,000 is inadequate, especially since the surrounding states are now providing more. And I think we can get to 41.5, at least match Mississippi's minimum salary schedule. And so I just wanted to make that for the record again, that amount really concerns me, and I'm still concerned about just the $2 increase in funding for education support professionals, because we are losing people to Walmart. We're losing them to Amazon. We're losing them to Costco now that they're here, because they're offering benefits and salaries that are greater than those that are in the public schools. And no entity in this public school arena is unimportant. And so we've got to find a way to be competitive as we talk about what we really need to be doing to provide not only adequacy, but the exceptional. And we cannot do it if we're paying less than market value. Thank you.
Senator Sturch.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is for Representative Evans. Representative Evans, on the salary enhancement for the classified staff, there where you have the $44 extra, as you see the line below, the adjustment for retirement, $50 from fiscal year 22, do you know if there I guess I'll ask this question first. Do you know how much it was for the $44 overall? Do we have an idea how many more millions that would be?
It's about 20,800,000, I believe.
Okay. The concern I have that hasn't
Per
been,
year, yeah.
the concern I have that hasn't been brought up is why it might be just $2 extra per hour. Those employees, some of those classified staff are now having to pay in to the teacher retirement system. The rules changed that after so many contracted days or months that a classified person works at a school, they're now getting the percentage taken out of their check as well. So along with health insurance going up and so forth, we're now taking, 6%, 7% out of their check. So like I said, I know that every time we change a dollar on here, it's not, just a few thousand, it's millions. But I wanted to bring that point up too, is that if we're not going to do any adjustment then for retirement going forward, maybe that $44 could go up, at least for the classified staff, to cover some of those extra expenses. And that would be my comment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Godfrey, you're back.
Yes, I'm sorry. Representative Evans, I just wanted clarification, and maybe this is better for the department, but in regards to special ed funding, our adequacy report talks about special education high-cost occurrences, and the matrix says SPED catastrophic. Are those the same thing, or are those different? Or when I went back and reviewed the report, I was concerned, that we had, I think it was something like 25 million of eligible high-cost occurrences that went unfunded to districts, and I didn't know if that was because of lack of funding or if that's why we've increased SPED catastrophic. I just kind of want to check that, if that's the same thing, and if that increase to catastrophic will rectify that issue.
Representative Guy, I would have to yield to Secretary Key to give you a clear definition on that. I know the purpose of increasing the SPED catastrophic for 24 and 25 to 17 million was based upon feedback we received from the department on what their actual cost had been. And so we had been actually producing a deficit in how that was being funded. And so they projected that if we would increase that to 17 million, that would cover what the actual cost has been. To get that clear definition of the high cost versus catastrophic, I'd yield to Secretary Key.
Okay, great. That's all I needed to know.
Same.
Thank you.
Okay.
Senator Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess perhaps Representative Evans, this may be for you as well, or anybody who can respond. I was thinking back to when we were discussing teacher salaries, and it was surrounding what the governor had presented. And at one point, it was a higher number, and then he brought it down to, about, I think maybe about $2,000 or so. And then teachers had a lot of activity around pushing us to put in place what the governor was suggesting, but with those numbers. And we had a pretty compelling response and from the Department of Education about how we could do it. So what I'm wondering, based on our having said to teachers, we're going to deal with this in the adequacy committee. And I know we didn't say we're going to have the same proposal as the governor did, but that was an attempt to at least be more competitive in the region. Can you just talk to me about why we would not go for a higher salary and an expeditious manner, because I think we're in such a precarious position of not being competitive right now.
All I can base that on, Senator, is just the feedback that I personally received as I talked to different districts across the state, different teachers that maybe live in my district, in my representative district, but teach at other schools. And that number just is a number that kept coming back as they felt that was the $4,000 raise to where they currently are, put them, more competitive within the district or the region of the state that they were currently employed by, or whether it was an administrator that said, we believe that that makes us more competitive, even though the water level rises the same. At least it put them more competitive with potentially other businesses that may be attracting those teachers outside the education system. So, I don't know that there's a silver bullet or a perfect number that's just going to satisfy the opinions of everyone in this room, but that was just a recommendation that I personally had based upon feedback that I was able to gather over the last several months, and most especially since the time that the governor laid that plan out.
Well, Mr. Chair, could you talk to me, Representative Evans, I've given me his notion of it, of a response to this question, which I heard well and respect, but he is talking from his point of view of the people that talked to him. What have you heard? What's been the response to you? Because the thing that teachers were so afraid of, that they would just be heard and then that would be it. But we were going to come to the Adequacy Committee and deal with it. And I've heard from so many who were of the opinion we were at least going to do what was in discussion at the time they were assured the salary issue was going to be dealt with. And no teacher has said to me that somebody had said, we're definitely going to do this. But that's what so many of them read from our response to them. If you would just hold on, we will do the thing that will make us more competitive. And what's being proposed will do that in some ways. But it's just, I'm not convinced we couldn't do better. What are your thoughts about if we could do better? Just because we've got a number on paper now, could we do better? And what would it take to do better? And should we depend on these local school districts to have to bear that burden? Because after all, the Constitution is pretty clear about who's responsible for education in this state, and it doesn't say local school districts. It says the state. Your thoughts, please.
That was to you.
Yes, I was.
Sorry.
Why
I thought you were
why
talking
could we
to
not?
Representative Evans.
No, he's already answered.
Oh, my thoughts, yes, I believe we have done better. I believe we have been doing well.
Mr. Chair, excuse me, because I don't want you to misinterpret my question. I'm not saying we're not doing better in the proposal. I'm asking why could we not do better and at least reach for something that's going to make us more competitive in line with kind of what so many teachers were thinking we were going to do. I'm asking why we could not do that and do better. Not that your proposal is not better. I'm not suggesting that it's not better.
I think that this is what we have worked on. This is what our goal was. The goal has been a hard-fought goal to get there. I believe in the next year that goal jumps and it jumps again. We just got to hold our schools accountable to move that mark along with us. This was a start. This put a pretty good jump into their salaries, and we're going to move that mark up, and it's going to continue to move. But you also got the teacher equalization salary in there that continues to move that mark, and with a combination of both of those, we can move that mark up. But we have to have the support of our school boards and our superintendents to help us move that mark and not put it in the bucket and let it set flat like they've done for so many years. So I think the legislature has been very diligent in funding our teachers fairly well. I'll say fairly. Was it the best? No, but I think we're making that best mark right now. And this doesn't stop us from doing this again in the future. But I think right now, this is the mark that we have fought for. Brian has fought very hard for this. I'll tell you that. I have too. All the committee members have had questions over this. Why do we do this? Why are we not doing this? So we have fought really hard to get this number, and I believe this is the number that we can do. This is what the teachers expected. Not that we give them everything they expect, but I think we're trying to work with our teachers and our staff and giving them the best raise we can for the time. And the classified is a number that was suggested to us from somebody else. wasn't anybody in this business, but that would be a great number for helping our classified out.
So if the Senate brings a proposal that moves us forward a bit more, because I think this is so disappointing to folks who thought it was going to be more than this. And is this for the House final answer, or are you open to further discussion if the Senate, has a different answer?
We can't speak for the Senate.
No, I didn't ask you to
This
speak
is
for
a
the
House
Senate.
proposal. I think she asked for a split vote. So the House would vote on it first, and if the Senate wants to vote on it, that is totally up to y'all.
No, my question, though, was, and it's to the motion itself, I guess, because if this motion means, and you vote yes, that's the final answer for the House, or are you open to a reconciliation effort if the Senate has a different proposal, is what I ask.
Well, I'm going to tell you how it's been done in the past.
I already know that, so you can just go ahead and answer my
There's been two
question.
proposals. I don't know. I don't know where to go. I don't want to belabor this issue any longer than we have to, because there's so much that's got to happen in the future and quickly. So I'm really.
I can speak.
Thank
I can
you.
speak for the senators. If the Senate wants to, meet, we can continue to do that. I just have questions about the funding. At what? Can I ask a quick question? Okay, just on your the proposal to do this within the fiscal year 23, which to me, that is retroactively doing that. How does that fit within the current adequacy recommendation? So we are actually changing the current adequacy recommendation for the biennium that we're in, is how I understand that. So, because I believe it went from 33.8 to 36, and then it would move to 40. Within this budget that we're currently in, how would that be funded, and how would that be funded, and how would that work? Because you're actually changing a current adequacy recommendation that was passed. You're changing that. And so I don't want us to get into a point where we say, to me, that sets a little bit of a precedence, and I'm not sure if I'm comfortable with that. My intention was for us to have that moving forward, starting fiscal year 24, because that's kind of how we've always done, these recommendations were for the new, the new part of the new fiscal years and the new biennium, so, which would be August of 23, which would be next school year. So can you explain to me just the budgetary impact, or how that's funded, or how that would create a change to the current adequacy recommendation?
We're not hearing that right now.
That's just my only question.
Let me answer that question. So that the funding for the 23 year, which is now, we have often went back and revisited the matrix and changed things in the matrix, such as we did for retirement and health insurance. So that's not a no. You can do that.
Okay.
And I talked to the Department of Ed about it. I said, do we need to split the 23 and do the future matrix? He said, no, you can do it all at one time. So that's why we're doing it this way. It will be one matrix change, and it'll all be in there. So the funding is there. The money's there for this change for what's right now. The new future 24-25 will be built into the new budget that we're going to start working on, and so there should be no problems with the money.
Okay, can you be specific, as you say the money is there? Can you be specific as to where that money would be coming from?
DFNA is holding that amount of money. That's what the governor had set aside also for his proposal. That money is still available, and we should have no problem getting that.
What specific bucket are you talking
I
about?
cannot tell you that. We'd have to have Larry Walters answer that. The department may know what's that bucket's in, but.
Does the department have that information? Could you come to the table and answer my question, please? I have members asking me these questions, so I need to ask them on their behalf because they're not part of the committee, and so I'm asking for them on their behalf.
Johnny Key, Department of Education. I can't speak for DFNA. I know with the department's funds that have been available back in when the governor asked us to put together a proposal back in the spring, there was funding available in the public school fund and in the adequacy fund as a result of, the same thing that's been driving the state surplus has also been driving the special revenue of the department in the adequacy fund because it's sales tax. And so the sales tax growth has been higher than the projected growth when we set the budget 2 years ago. So there is funds available to help with this process, and then DFNA back in the spring when we were working with the governor had identified that there was money available for sustainability. We have not run these numbers because there is a tweak that, as I understood Representative Evans yesterday talking about the our proposal in the spring that the governor put forward had $425 per ADM. I think yesterday you talked about $450. So, we haven't run those numbers to see how they compare to what we put together in the spring.
So the adequacy fund is the fund that they're discussing that DFNA has set aside. I just want to make sure I'm real clear because I have senators asking me these questions. I've asked to get the information for them through this process. They just would like to know how this is going to be paid for within the current fiscal year 23.
Yeah,
I think that's a legitimate question to ask.
I could speak to the adequacy. I know what is in the adequacy fund. Robert Breck or somebody would have to answer the question on what they're seeing in DFNA. I can speak to what we get and what's been certified to the department with the adequacy fund, and it's running well ahead of.
What's that budget, or what's that balance right now? Do you have that by chance? Just so that we kind of know. Because it would be the adequacy fund plus something else is what I'm hearing.
Between the adequacy and public school fund, and remember the public school fund, we set that budget based on numbers that we estimated during COVID. So the number of students, the ADM has not rebounded yet. So that there's surplus there. I won't say surplus. There's reserve. There's a balance in the public school fund, and it's combined between the two. It's around $600 million.
So it'd be that $600 million plus whatever DFNA has identified from some unknown bucket.
Yeah, I cannot speak to. They were looking at overall surplus numbers back in the spring, but I really would defer to them on answering that.
So, I guess that's information that I think some of my Senate colleagues would like to know. I guess and that would be from the House side of things because y'all were the ones that worked with DFNA. And so if that is good information, if you can get DFNA to answer that for us, that would be great to the House members. Thank you.
We believe there's sufficient money there. We've been told there is. So, I can't bring DFNA right now in, but I believe even through the adequacy money and stuff like that, I believe we have sufficient money to start funding that and then pull the rest in. So I don't think there's any shortage of money to fund what we're wanting to do. All right, I'm going to continue with questions. Thank you. Hold on. Got one of the, I'll pull Senator Chesterfield in. Sister Chesterfield. You're recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Key, when the governor first proposed a salary increase for teachers, his original number was 46. He subsequently dropped it down to 42. Was that sustainable in your view?
We believe it was.
Thank you.
Representative Love, you recognize. Do you have anything for the department?
Thank
Representative, hold on, Representative, there you go. Do you have anything for the department?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I've been sitting here listening to a lot of the discussion, but you said that the budgeted number was 600 million? Is that what you said? Or are you saying the real dollars?
No, sir, that is at whatever point in time we looked, and I can't remember exactly when we looked at it last, but 600 million was the combined available amount between the public school fund balance and the adequacy fund balance. And keeping in mind that those are pots of money that we're using with DFNA to establish the budget for 24, 25, going through the budget cycle that we're going through now. So, but between those commitments, depending on the recommendations of this body, and what we looked at back in the spring, putting the numbers together for the governor's proposal, that's what we were looking at to base our projections on.
And these revenues will be sustained. Is that your testimony? Is that?
We believe that at the time in the spring, when we put this together, it was sustainable for what the governor wanted to do. Now, again, to ask that whether it's sustainable now, I mean, that's going to depend on the overall recommendations from this body and the total amount, which seems to be varying at this point. So, but as far as teacher salaries, what we submitted to the governor, we worked with DFNA and we were confident that it was sustainable.
Okay. Mr. Chair, how much was the House proposal? Or a question to Mr. Evans, how much is a House proposal?
I wasn't paying attention. Would you ask me?
I've got that in front of me, Secretary Key. So the total for the additional salary for certified and classified, including the benefits, is $232.9 million. Now, that is a high-end number. We believe that number could actually be less because it's based upon the increase in insurance. And so depending upon, as insurance is paid out incrementally throughout the year, depending on what time this would become active, that exposure to the overall insurance total for the year could be less. So the 232,936 would be
to fund your
the high.
proposal.
That is correct.
Okay. Mr. Chair, I don't, this being my first year on adequacy, let me ask you this. Do we ever establish a budget that we want to provide to adequacy or inadequacy? Is there a budgeted amount?
No, there is not. If you're talking about it, you're asking them if they decide how much money we can spend or have for it. No, there is not.
Okay. And so we never do establish that number?
Do you want to know what we have on the bottom line of this budget, of this amount?
No, I'm trying to talk through the process. Do we ever establish a number there where we say this is a threshold of how much we want to spend into adequacy?
No, that's not how you do adequacy. You do it according to the need and supply the need.
Okay, so if we have $600 million and we are not funding adequacy to where we need it to be, then why are we stopping at $240 million?
There again, we're not stopping at that. That is just that number of costs for the teachers. There's still a lot of other driven costs in this proposal. If you look at the bottom, you've got a sheet over there. If you look at the bottom of the FY 23-22 difference, total is $386 million. And then you go to the next year of 24, you've got $147 million. And then the last year in 25 is $85 million. So if you blew it all in the first year, you'd have none to fund the rest of the years. So some of that is probably already spoken for that's in their budget that they're funding out at this time, probably to the schools. I'm not positive about that, but I believe that's the way it works.
So Mr. Key, is some of that $600 million already spoken for?
Those two pots of money combined are used to help determine the budget based on the adequacy recommendations. So as far as what it's spoken for, I mean, it is used in the process of determining what the FY24 budget will be. And that money is then used to offset possible general revenue increases that would be necessary. So it doesn't work as a standalone. It works in conjunction with general revenue and the recommendations from this committee.
Okay, and I guess my last question is this, in talking about teacher salaries and special ed and different things like that, different parts of the matrix, have we established kind of our key priorities for the matrix as far as where we want the funding to fall?
Fred, that's what we've been doing since January. That's what we've been doing in this committee, is establishing those key priorities, going over all those reports, taking all those reports into mind and putting them into this matrix on the changes that we've done.
Okay, let me ask the question like this. Where is that list? Do we have that list that we have actually come up with?
It's in your book. It's all of those things in that book. There's no list. It's just you take those priorities and work on that process.
Okay. Thank you.
Representative Murdoch.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know that I have a question for anybody. It's probably more of a statement that I need to get out. And it's relative to why we're here and what we're doing and the composite of why we're here as legislators. You know, as we sit here now and we talk.
Do you have a question for the department? I'm gonna let them. I'm gonna move them. Okay.
No.
You're good with them going away? Okay.
Yeah, they're good.
Thank you.
You know, as I sit here and look at the composite of why we're here as legislators and what we do in total, we're obviously here for Education Committee meeting. We're talking about adequacy. We're dealing with a court order and we're dealing with priority. And we're sitting here talking about special ed. We're talking about transportation, where we've done assessments, and the assessments say, let's do this, and we're funding it to that being less than this. And then there's some arbitrary numbers that we've come up with, not arbitrary, there's some numbers we've come up with, through some study and some work. But there's no reason why we cannot do what we should do to make the teachers priority and get those salaries where they need to be to make the state competitive so that we can keep our teachers. And I'm talking about above what we're recommending. I'm talking about the more conversation. When you look at the whole conversation of what we've done as a legislature, we cut taxes. And we cut taxes to the tune of, you know the numbers, over $500 million. And what we said while we were doing that in a responsible way, it was said to those that supported it, which is most of the people in this room, is that we will still be able to take care of our teachers, our support staff, education. And the court order, Lakeview says that before you spend another dollar in this state, that you take care of education first. That's what the court order says. We have not, and we continue to not, as we sit here right now. And you take the composite of our settings, of us being here, of our being. And if you take what we've done in tax cuts, so that don't mean I'm against tax cuts, but I'm saying I'm for something that's inclusive of everybody getting what they're supposed to get. How do I take money out the house and the lights are flickering? The water is trickling. We don't have the services inside the house to make the house whole, but we're taking money and we're giving it away. We're doing a charitable thing to some people that, I'm sure appreciate us. But we got issues inside the house. When we talk about transportation and the studies that I and others have done, and we came up with real needs, our students sitting on the bus in rural areas not able to get to and fro, and then we come here and we fund it to just some number. One thing you've heard me say this year after year, that I've been frustrated with the Adequacy Committee is we continue to do something, but we never do what it says for us to do, or what we should do, in my honest opinion, what we should do to supply our school districts, our students, our state with the funding and the accountability that follows it to make sure we're doing what we do to make us a more affordable state, to make us more of a competitive state. I think this discussion is necessary from this standpoint. We get here, I've heard this before, Representative Cozart, whereby we say we got to get this done by this date. We're up against a deadline. But really what we're up against is we're past the deadline, because what we've done is we continue to fail the people that's out there on the front line supporting us and teaching our children in the classrooms. So my point here is this. As a total, we've done some things. We've made some decisions as a state. We cut taxes to the tune of hundreds of millions. That's done. Now, we have the funds here. And in my reassessment of the assessment of what's before us, we need to do more. The governor put forth something initially at $46,000 that would make us very competitive. The Secretary of Education has confirmed that we thought it was sustainable. It's up to us. We're the money spenders. Let's show our people that we truly support them. We truly support education. We're going to obey the court order, and let's be what we should be for our people. Thank you.
Representative Beck.
Yes, and my question was actually for the Board of Education, but maybe someone here can answer the question for me. And apparently I don't understand the system, because there's $600 million sitting somewhere, and we're talking that we can fund this thing with this $600 million or part of it or whatever we're doing with it. And this may be the part that I don't understand. Then if that money's there, it seems like some people are dancing around the issue. Maybe we should have used it for that already. But the more important question is, I think we ought to ask is, if we didn't use that $600 million, what would it have gone to fund?
I think you're going to have to answer that. I can't tell them.
And Representative Beck, DFNA has come over because it's beyond the 600 million from what I'm understanding. So DFNA is also here to answer a question if for that other portion, which I'm not sure what that is.
Johnny Key, Department of Education. So this is money that we did not know 2 years ago when we were setting the budget. We did not expect that there would be this sizable balance in these two funds.
Okay.
Because we budgeted based on what we estimated the number of students would be. Because almost everything we do is on a per ADM basis, effectively per student basis. So if you have a lower number of students than you predicted when we were setting the budget over 2 years ago, then you're not going to spend as much. If you look every month at the DFNA revenue report, so usually everybody looks at that top line number, the first couple of paragraphs. I always go to the last paragraph because that's where it talks about special revenues. That's where the adequacy special revenue is reported. And consistently, it has been $50 to $55 million in receipts, which is substantially more than what we had projected when we were setting the budget 2 years ago. So those are the drivers that creates this balance between those two funds of $600 million. It's just, like I said, it's being driven by the same economic conditions that have driven the overall state budget, as well as the increase in property valuations. I mean, that's another driver. So as property valuations go up around the state, then uniform rate of tax, the 25 mills, that goes up. That generates more revenue from that 25 mills that offsets some of the state funds. So over time, that's where that builds up. What would it have been spent on? Nothing, because we would not have had an appropriation to use that money for anything unless y'all give us an appropriation to spend that and direct where it goes.
So So did we just find out we have $600 million to spend? I mean, I understand the appropriations, but and I understand how the surplus was generated. It just seems like there's $600 million sitting out there that, we could be utilizing for something.
Yeah, and that was why the governor, when the governor proposed what he proposed in the spring, we didn't know what it would be today, but we knew what it was back in April and May. And so those were the numbers we were looking at, along with working with DFNA to determine the sustainability of it.
All right, thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
So I'm going to follow up on those thoughts. The sustainability issue is the main concern. There's a lot of concern that with the inflation that we're currently experiencing, that at some point in the near future, there's a high probability we're going to go into a recession. When that occurs, what's going to happen to those surpluses that we currently have now? Because those surpluses are probably just a function of the fact that things are going good now. We've had a big influx of federal money. What's going to happen during a recession?
The department would not have the knowledge of that. I can tell you this, though, with the URT, the property values, I mean, those get baked in. So that local portion that
right, the URT would remain.
That's gonna stay.
Right,
you're not gonna see a big drop from that, and that's been a pretty substantial driver on this. Could it affect sales tax revenue? Absolutely. So those are all things that we were looking at the time with the FNA and looking at that sustainability factor.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Matt. Representative Meeks, we do have DFNA here. If they could come up to the table, I think it would be best because this is, to me, in my understanding, this is a retroactive change to fiscal year 23. I have to understand that, and I'm not quite understanding the numbers. That's my. I fully support moving forward fiscal year 24, whatever that salary increase is. I'm just not sure how this is going to work. So, could you describe where this additional $400 million is, or can you highlight us some more in the information and questions by Representative Meeks?
Yes, thank you, Robert Barreca, State Budget Office. I'm not aware of a $400 million pot that's been set aside for this purpose. I think there are only two avenues to go if you're going to get that much money. One is you've got the Catastrophic Reserve Fund, which is $1.2 billion. Also in the General Reserve Allotment Fund, there is $1.35 billion. That's what's left over from the surplus from last year. The only $400 million pot, if that's what you want to call it, we have talked about what the expected surplus is for FY23. We were expecting a surplus of around $950 million. With the $500 million in tax cuts that was passed recently, now it's expected to be around $450 million. Perhaps that's where the confusion is. Of course, that money is not available now. Parts of it would be. Because of the tax cuts, there was a $165 million low-income tax credit that was effective January 1st. We expect most of that to be distributed through payroll deduction decreases in October, November, and December. So there is not, there would be money left over according to the forecast. But again, that's this one year, and that's the forecast. I assume that's the $400 million that maybe people are talking about. If you want to take it out of the General Reserve Allotment Fund, that can only be touched, if you're in session and wanted to take that out for that purpose. But those are the only pots of money that I'm aware of.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Sure.
That, Oh, you had a question for him? Okay. I'm just going to chime in on that. I had talked with Larry a couple of times, and he's always asked about what our recommendation was going to be in adequacy. And we knew that there was going to be a teacher raise ask, and he's always said that, he's holding a certain amount for us. Now, whether that was, completely what amount that was exactly, but that's exactly kind of the amount we talked about a few times. So that's where the 400 million come from me. So Representative Meeks, you recognize. Let me get you back on the queue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So that's kind of my follow-up here. I know during the last recession in Texas, they actually had to cut teacher salaries because of the strain on theirs, and we didn't because of our conservative budgeting. And with the recession looming, we want to take care of our teachers, but at the same time, we don't want to put ourselves in a position so that 3 or 4 years from now, if we get into a financial bind, we're having to cut salaries. We don't want to do that. And so we're looking at this year a $400 million increase to the state budget or through these funds. Next year, we're looking to add an additional $150 million on top of that. Year after that, $85 million on top of that. In your opinion, are those increases sustainable, especially given nobody knows the future. I get that, but there's a high probability that we're looking at a recession in the near future. Can the state budget absorb that impact and still be able to meet the obligations that we're wanting to make for our teachers?
I can only go off of the state revenue forecast. The problem was always going to be FY24, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
We knew FY23 we were expecting over a $900 million surplus. The tax cuts reduced that by $500 million, round figures. But the surplus in 24 is only forecasted to be, don't quote me, but I'm going to get this close, $240 million. If you do the type of increase that you're talking about, I think I heard the number 234.
Mm-hmm.
If you add that to the other $109 million increases, you add to that the building of the base that we did because of the salary increases for state employees, which was around $40 million. There's about $110 million in budget increase request outside education. And then if you add another $41 million for a pay plan, you're looking at around 7% budget increase for FY24. In my opinion, that's not sustainable. The budget increases have been around 3% or less. If you do forecasting out 3 or 4 years at 3%, which is growing the budget at around $180 million a year, that's sustainable. You can just about look at it and say it's sustainable at 4%. If you start going up to 5% and do that 2 or 3 years in a row, you can see where you could erase a surplus really quickly. If you're talking about another $420 million in spending, you do that 2 or 3 years in a row, there will be no surplus. I don't think that's sustainable, to be honest.
So doing it one time, we think we're okay, but if we do it again, that's where we get into the problem. Is that correct?
We did look at a scenario when we were looking at teacher increases earlier, where if we had a one-time budget, bump of 5%, but then went back to a normal growth, that probably could be sustainable. It's just, and that was figuring on 5%. 5% is around $300 million. If education needs 230, 240, you can see how much is left for the rest of state government. And so I think a one-time blip is sustainable, but I think we've got to be careful about that and try to keep that at a reasonable level if you want to continue with any tax decreases. And because of the tax decreases that we've already done, you can't do both without erasing those budget surpluses really quickly.
All right, thank you.
Representative Meeks, everything Robert said is correct. I would just point out that in that box on this chart that says total dollar increases by year, again, when we look at that, we know that some of that would be offset by increase in uniform rate of tax. So that's not all general revenue or adequacy that's reflected there. Some of that is going to be picked up at the local level by those increases.
To follow up, do we know if we do this within fiscal year '23 and make this change, how that would affect the current existing budget rate of growth? Do we know that?
If you tried to do that out of the $400 million surplus that's being forecasted, I suppose you could do it that way. I don't know how much money you're talking about from January to the end of the fiscal year. I didn't hear that part of the conversation. I'm not sure how much you're.
We don't think it would affect it, the general revenue budget, because of the special revenue that we have available to cover this for FY23.
So you're saying that the $600 million will cover it, and you don't need the additional $400 million bucket from DFNA?
Not in FY23.
But you would.
FY24 is when you would have to have the ongoing additional revenue.
Okay, I didn't understand it that way. Thank you.
All right, Senator Chesterfield? Wait a minute, I got the wrong one up there, but let me get you up there. All right, go ahead.
I think you got me.
I think I've got everybody but you. Everybody just stay in the queue. I finally got it. I got everybody lit up, so y'all just stay in the queue.
I understand. Both Robert and John were in the discussions with the governor. Am I correct? DFNA and Education were in the discussion with the governor when he proposed the 46 and then subsequently the 42. Am I correct?
That's correct.
And you gave him your best advice, and it was that this is indeed sustainable.
At that time, if I recall the number correctly, with using money out of the adequacy funds and other funds education had, they were looking for $140 million, if I recall, from the state.
Okay.
140 million is much more sustainable than 400. The 400 sounds, unsustainable to me.
But with that would have given us the
was.
$42,000 starting salary and or the $46,000 starting salary. Refresh his memory, Greg.
But I know the original proposal to go with a $4,000 increase and a $46,000 minimum was $330 million. So then we backed away from that after the initial conversations, and but even at that, we felt like with what we had available and what the forecast at the time was telling us, that it was sustainable, with the caveat that the mechanism that you all had passed in the last session with the teacher salary equalization would be necessary to be adjusted so that the smaller rural districts would not run into the red trying to keep up with the new minimum.
That makes sense to me. Thank you so much.
Let's see, Representative Murdoch, I think you're still in there.
Okay, thank you. I think Senator Chesterfield pretty much went through the scenario I was trying to deal with, was who was in the room when we were previously, the public was previously told about the 46 and then subsequently the 42. It appears as though DFNA, well, the chair mentioned 400 million. DFNA is saying that's unsustainable. The 46 took us to 330 million, but part of that, I guess, comes from the special fund, and you're talking about what comes from the state general revenue, I think, more than anything. So I guess what we get here, so what we receive is what you give us. That's the first thing. And when you give us something, we want to be able to believe what we hear. And we think you're going to do it in a manner that's sustainable, because you know that the districts, certain districts cannot handle this themselves. So when it comes to us at 46, which is a competitive number, and when we couple that with what else we've done, and then we start talking about the conversation of a recession coming and other boo-hoo economics that can scare us from doing what we're supposed to do and ought to do. But we didn't think about that maybe when we said we're going to cut all these taxes. because that same recession could come. And then, so here's how we can fix this. Let's do what we're supposed to do for the teachers. Let's go to the 46. If we have to do something with tax cuts in terms of rescission, let's do that. And let's keep teachers as priority in education where it should be per the court order, and we all will be fine. And let's put the people first, and then we deal with those others later. Those other matters later of luxury, which is what I'm calling tax cuts. The priority education is not the luxury. Tax cuts is something you ought to be able to do when everything is truly pretty enough that we can do that. And I'm for that then. But when we do tax cuts at the level we've done them, then we come back and have these conversations, somewhere that's not the correct conversation. That we have our priorities out of order. And it may just be me and others that think like me. But I think the priority should be different than what we've done. And we can still fix it. Thank you.
Representative Brown, you have a question?
No, I don't really
Senator
have a
Elliott, you're on, but
question.
don't talk yet.
Mine is mostly a comment. It's my understanding that this is a recommendation and that changes will be made when we go into the legislature and other ideas will be incorporated. And I believe that right now we have an opportunity to give the teachers a nice raise of $4,400. And I believe that we need to pass this proposal, and we can still work on it in session. But I believe we need to assure the teachers that they will be getting a raise. And I think that's critical. They want to know, and I think it's important for us to move forward. Thank you.
Senator Elliott, you're on. I'll go ahead and let you talk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure who will answer this question for me, but I guess it should be, I guess this is a DF&A question. When we look at our budget and look at our budget in terms of Lakeview, to be specific, with that Lakeview hanging over here, when we look at our budget, what would a person gather from our budget that is our priority? Would that be education?
Well, education is the priority. Education gets 41% of all the GR. It doesn't include the money that goes into adequacy and educational excellence. So by far, and that's just K-12, higher ed's another 13%. So I think that obviously education is a priority, and that's where the bulk of the money goes. So,
And I agree with that. It is our priority. But the question we have to ask ourselves now, per Lakeview, is our priority what it should be in terms of commitment? Is the question. There's no question when you look at the raw numbers. But the part I think that we need to think more carefully about is, here's a number, it's 41%, but actually it used to be higher than that.
DHS has actually cut into that, if you'd like to know.
Yes, it used to be higher. It used to be higher than that.
DHS has gone from 25 to 30% of your budget.
That's right. So when we talk about, and this is one thing we fall back on, that education is our priority. We're spending more money there than any place else. That could be true. You know, if I'm spending more money of my income, I may be spending more money on one item in my life, but I actually need a whole lot more. I'm spending more, say, on insurance, health insurance, than I am on anything else. But does that make my health insurance adequate? It surely doesn't for a person out there struggling. And that's what I'm seeing right now with our teachers and education. It is the priority in raw numbers, but I'm not sure it is in effect. And the other thing that's important about that is the question that was asked earlier. We are never supposed to decide what, as the chair pointed out, we are never supposed to decide what we can afford in adequacy. That conversation, it was made clear that you don't say, well, we're going to give, we think prior to, we're just going to do, in this case, a CPI a CPI investment raise without knowing if that's really adequate. And we settle on that number sometimes and we leave it there. And that's not the way to do adequacy. So what we are supposed to do, and the reason I'm so bothered about having decided on a number that we're going to do for our teachers without examining, I think, if we can do more in a very serious way. Because that should be the mark. If we know that we are not even competitive at the regional level, I don't know how we can call that adequate. I can't make that compute. Now, I'm not talking to you guys now. Right now, I'm just talking to the committee, I guess. So if it is a priority, and it has to be, I don't know how the priority can be a salary that is less than competitive where we are right now. So, Mr. Chair, I don't know if there's a question in there or not, but I guess I need to ask the commissioner if he remembers when we first started, because he and I worked together on a lot of this stuff. We are some of the way backers. It was drilled into us and made known to us pretty clearly. We could decide what adequacy is, but that didn't make us God that we could decide it, because we had to be able to defend it. I don't know how I can defend that we are not even competitive at the regional level. You have any thoughts about that? You can say no if you don't.
No, I do, Senator, and you're correct. And I do recall over the almost 20 years, a lot of these conversations. And, frankly, we fell down on our job in the time between 2009 and 2014 or whenever it was that we did not move minimum teacher salaries. It stayed under $30,000 for
years.
For years. So we do have a responsibility. I think other states in the moves that they have made do really amplify the need that we have as a state, and that's what Governor Hutchinson was working to respond to back in the spring in admittedly unorthodox timing of having the consideration of a teacher salary increase in a special session even put out there as a possibility. But he believes, and I believe, that it was necessary then. It's still necessary. We still need to be working to increase those to whatever level does make us or keep us competitive. Yeah.
Well, this is related, Mr. Chair. I wanted to ask this question. How much have we set aside a certain amount of money we're considering spending on prison expansion for prison beds?
There was one proposal out of the $1.628 billion surplus that we had in FY22. There was a $150 million restricted reserve account set up. In that account, there was money to expand prison up in Calico Rock. I believe, I may get this wrong, but I believe it was $70 million or so. And that's true.
And that's one-time money?
That was one-time money. That's correct.
One-time money that we really could have. It's going to be what it takes 2 or 3 years to build that expansion.
Yeah. I'm not sure how long it will take to
That's
build.
what I understand now from talking to some of the judges and other people. And by the time we get to that, we could have already had a salary schedule for teachers that is commensurate with what we had put out there. It's something we consider. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate you.
Representative Johnson, you're recognized.
Yeah, I have a question for the table. So, as I understand the Educational Adequacy Fund, what you're saying is that there's $600 million in the Education Adequacy Fund. Is that correct?
Between the balance of the Educational Adequacy Fund and the Public School Fund.
Okay.
Between those two, there's approximately 600.
But Education Adequacy Fund has a specific revenue stream based primarily on sales tax, correct?
Yes, that's
So
sales tax.
we haven't done any tax cuts that I know of to affect the funding of the Adequacy Fund.
No.
But we have cut taxes that affects general revenue, which puts more money in the pocket of Arkansans, which gives them the opportunity to spend more money, which would generate more sales tax revenue. Is that a fair assumption or a possibility?
It is.
So, I mean, again, I think we're working towards funding adequacy, and to say that by cutting taxes and general revenue that we're somehow undercutting education funding, I don't think that's an accurate statement, because I think there is an argument to be made that by cutting general taxes for the average Arkansan, that's putting more money in their pocket that they can spend on items which generates more sales tax, which increases the adequacy fund. I just wanted to make sure I understood the revenue streams from those places appropriately. Mr. Chair, I have a motion if it's appropriate.
What's your motion?
We have a motion on the table. I move that we end discussion on that motion and move for immediate consideration.
It's proper motion, no debate. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, no. Motion carries. Representative Vaught, would you like to reinstate your motion just to make sure it's clear?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We all need to remember this is not the end all to be all, because this is still just moving us forward. So with that, Mr. Chair, I move that we accept the adequacy proposal that was presented here today and divide the chambers.
You want to vote that by chambers?
Yes, sir.
Okay. We will start with the House. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed on the House? Motion carries. Would the House like to vote on that proposal? I mean the Senate, I'm sorry. All right. You have some out. Do you want to bring them back in? You have one out. Somebody want to grab Joyce? I'm sure she'd like to vote one way or the other. Got a couple out, I guess. You had some leave. You have a what? Okay, well, let's let them do theirs. Okay. I just didn't want to cut y'all out. So. Okay, the motion was the same as Representative Vaught reinstated her motion to vote for the matrix that the House proposed, and we're going to let the Senate vote on that also. So I will call that all in favor from the Senate. Say aye. All opposed? No. Okay, Senate opposes the matrix. House passed the resolution. The resolution, they passed it for that. Representative Godfrey, what is your?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If it's appropriate, I have an additional motion for another recommendation from this committee, if I could make that at this time.
Let's hear your recommendation.
I move for the Joint Committee on Education to make a recommendation that the 94th General Assembly consider the 2020 APA recommendation to remove special education funding from the matrix and instead provide weighted support based on actual special education students served after looking at funding models from other states and collaboration with key stakeholders.
Well, that's a long motion.
Basically, that we as a committee say we want to dig in further and consider taking special education funding out of the matrix as recommended by APA in 2020 and creating a weighted categorical, not that we require it, but that we do the work of looking into the recommendations or the models from other states and collaborate with key stakeholders, that is kind of an interest of this committee to consider that recommendation more in depth.
Then we going forward?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Y'all heard the motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. I'm sorry. Could y'all hear it okay? All right. I'll take the discussion on the motion. Representative Vaught.
Mr. Chair, don't we have to turn in a recommendation by a certain time limit to the governor's office?
It goes to the speaker and the pro tem.
And what is that date?
The date is November 1.
November 1. Thank you.
Representative Elliott, Senator Elliott, you have a question?
I did, and this is the process question because I'm not, I realize the House is about to vote the way however you vote. But it's just for going forward, should we not have the entire, is the Senate going to vote again on this or something? Because unless you have the entire motion when you start the voting, you are changing the motion in the middle of the voting.
Senator Elliott, do you mean with
No,
mine in addition or the
Yeah,
first motion?
or anybody's addition, because when the motion was first read, it did not include your recommendation.
That's right.
And I don't have any problem with that, but I'm just saying, I'm thinking like going forward, it might really matter.
No, I think that's an important clarification. I intended it to be a second or an additional motion, an additional recommendation from this committee. I thought that there might be support from the Senate that may not have felt comfortable supporting the matrix proposal, but would be interested in this one. And so, I mean, if it's in order to add an additional recommendation from the committee, that's my intention here. But I certainly welcome clarification of the process.
Yeah, the process is the only thing, because I'm not saying this because I'm going to vote for the motion. I'm just saying it for process only. And whatever you do about that, you do about it. But I just think this is something important for going forward.
I think it is too.
Yeah,
That's what I'm
yeah.
saying. Yeah, I think we've already voted on the matrix, so this will be something going forward. We can revisit that real quickly and first of the year and put that and change that.
I don't need to revisit it. I just don't want this to happen sometime when it's something that is
That's
really
fine,
a big deal.
and I'll do whatever I need to do procedurally. I just did want to provide the opportunity to.
I suggest you carry on. I'm just going forward.
So Representative Godfrey, that's not for this recommendation, but for further recommendations?
Well, it is a recommendation out of this committee as part of the adequacy study. It's just not part of the matrix. It's an additional it's an additional policy recommendation that is not a line item on the matrix, but has come from the work of this committee, out of this committee, based on the adequacy report.
I understand.
And I worded it to be, it's not to require that we change to categorical, but that we consider that 2020 recommendation, that we collaborate with key stakeholders, and that we look at effective models from other states.
Thank you for clarification.
Yeah,
absolutely. I thought you meant trying to fix it this time, and I was like, how are we going to do that before November 1st?
Yeah, that's
right. Thank you for clarification.
Absolutely, yes.
I think we understand where you're at. I got one more question that's in line. Representative Meek.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm not opposed to looking at this. My question is more of a procedural question because this committee will expire in January. So anything we do, there's a whole new education committee that's going to be formed in January. And so this committee can't bind that committee to do anything in January. And so that's kind of my question here is anything that we do has to be done. I don't know if we're going to have any more meetings after November.
That's why it goes through a recommendation.
Right.
It would be a recommendation for the, whichever General Assembly's coming up on 94th General Assembly.
Okay.
And that's all we can do is make a recommendation, and those that move on to that can pick those up and run with them and go from there. All right. We'll take, that was the motion and a second. We had discussion. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right. That recommendation will be put into the file also and move forward. I guess there is no other business to come before us today. I'd be entertain a motion for adjournment. A motion and a second. We are adjourned.